Hey everybody, it's Terry Battisti with the Bass Fishing Archives, and I'm sitting in my hotel room in Greenville, South Carolina, and we're going to be doing some coverage of Classic 52 here at Hartwell Lake. What I got for you today is some recordings that I did with the anglers at Media Day. I've got 7 or 8 guys that I talked to, and what we did is we talked to them about how they got started fishing, how they started bass fishing, tournament fishing, etc. It's a pretty interesting look into these guys' lives, and what we're going to do is we're going to start off with Lee Livesay and see what he had to say, and then we'll put some videos out with respect to the other anglers that we talked about. So here we go. Lee Livesay. All right, so here with Lee Livesay, and we're going to talk about what got him interested in fishing and his journey in the sport. So, Lee, what's your first memory of actually fishing?
My first memory of fishing was probably when I was like 2 years old, probably. I mean, maybe a little bit longer than that, but there's pictures, like old Polaroids, you know, me in a little bitty blue life jacket and just with a little orange like Snoopy rod or something, I don't know what it was, catching some trout out in New Mexico with my parents.
Okay.
That was one of the first ones that I remember, you know, and I probably didn't do any of the fishing. I just remember being with them in the mountains and them catching little bitty trout on little ultralights and little creeks and stuff like that.
Well, so what about bass? What was the first time you caught a bass?
I was in Oklahoma. We moved from West Texas to Oklahoma, and we had a bunch of farm ponds around the house, and that was, my first experience catching a bass that I remember. You know, and it was probably on a crappie minnow or something. My grandpa was a big crappie fisherman, so we were probably fishing for crappie and caught it. You know, or maybe on a worm brim fish. You know, we weren't ever actually bass fishing back then. We were fishing for other species and catching just a couple bonus bass.
Right. So, did that spark an interest in bass fishing for you, or was that later?
No, that's what started it right there. I had 4 or 5 old farm ponds behind our house in Duncan, Oklahoma, and that's where it started, was right there. Okay. You know, eventually I got a little older and probably, 5 to 7 years old, that time range. You know, one of my best friends still is Chad Bailey, is my old team partner. Even when I moved to Texas, we would drive and fish big team tournaments, but his dad was a bass fisherman. My dad and mom and grandpa did like crappie, catfish, trout, stuff like that. But Chad's dad was a bass fisherman, and he's the one that got me into the actual bass fishing. He had a bass boat and all the bait casters and all that stuff, and I'd go to his house and go through all his worms and baits and all that stuff. So it actually came through my buddy Chad's dad in those ponds. Every day after school when I get home, I get off the bus, grab my rod and some worms and a spinner bait and go down there and fish until dark and then haul back home. So that's how it started, was farm pond fishing in Duncan, Oklahoma.
Right. So what was your first bass tournament? How old were you? What kind of boat were you fishing out of? Was it a team or what?
Yeah, I didn't start tournament fishing until later in college even. I fished a couple like Wednesday nighters in high school with some of my high school coaches or something like that. But I wasn't in the tournament scene at all. I fished all the time at Fork and all over East Texas with my dad and everybody all the time, but we weren't tournament guys. And then I moved off to college. I played football at the University of Louisiana Monroe, and that's where Caney is, and Darbone and Washita River. And I started, I met some of the local guys there that liked to fish and started fishing the Tuesday nighters and Thursday nighters, and that's really where I started actual bigger tournament fishing, was over there.
Okay. So what was your first tournament win?
Probably on Caney Lake in Louisiana on a Thursday nighter.
A Thursday nighter?
Yes, probably. My first big win. Obviously I started fishing back in Texas. When I got out of school and fishing big. The Bass Champs and Triple T's and stuff that pays a boat or 20 grand. And the first big win was a Bass Champs on Lake Ray Roberts with my buddy Chad Bailey from Oklahoma.
Right.
That was my first okay, we can win some money doing it, not just $1,000. We'd won $20-something thousand that day. So that was the first big win for me, was on Lake Ray Roberts.
Cool. All right. So what was the turning point in your life when you realized that you could actually compete at this level?
Well, I was at this point in time, I was back in Texas guiding full time on Fork and fishing those team tournaments and everything. And I had a client, Mac McMillan. He's one of my good sponsors and a good friend. And he was on a guide trip with me when I first met him. You know, it was just me and him, and we were both fishing. You know, he was letting me fish with him, and I was wearing him out. You know, and I had a little technique down, and he was like, "Hey, you can fish pretty good," you know. And he hit one of his buddies and his team partners, Trevor Romans. He used to fish the Elite Series, so he knows, you know, kind of the talent. He said, "Man, you should go fish the Opens and try this." You know, and I said, you know, I'm not spending $5,000 or whatever it was back then on the Opens. And he said, "Man, I'll sponsor you. You know, I got, you know, this company. I'll sponsor you, and I'll travel with you, and I'll fish too, and we'll just travel together." And the first Open I fished, almost won. Christy, or actually, I remember Christy won. Somebody beat me on the Arkansas River, but almost won a couple ounces. And that's when I thought, okay, I might can compete. Was that first Open that I fished?
Cool. Well, sir, I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Go kick butt tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yep.